Good morning, I'm Rowena Crosby.
And I'm Deborah Rinner, and we're your co-hosts for this show. Thank you for joining us for the next 17 minutes for your Invisible Toolbox, the show that examines the tools for working effectively with others.
We welcome you to today's live broadcast, and before we actually get into our show, we do want to take a moment to pause and acknowledge the tragic events that we all woke up to the news of this morning in Las Vegas with the mass shootings. On behalf of all of us at Tero, our hearts and prayers are with everyone who is impacted by this tragedy.
And our thoughts and prayers are added to the thoughts and prayers we've had of those who have experienced the hurricanes, Houston, Puerto Rico, Florida, the Caribbean. We just have had a lot lately that have been on all of our hearts.
Been touching our hearts, yes. So a lot of tragedy in the world right now. We are on location at the World Food Prize building in downtown Des Moines, and we're in this beautiful Iowa gallery for our live broadcast. The World Food Prize has been called the Nobel Prize of Food and Agriculture, and the prize itself is going to be awarded at an impressive ceremony at the Des Moines Capitol building later this month.
Each year, diplomats from all around the world come to this building and come to this event. And you know, when we look at the definition of diplomat, there are actually two. One definition is someone who is appointed by their national government in order to be able to keep up political and social relationships and negotiate on behalf of the country and countries. The other definition is any person who is tactful and able to manage those specific interactions that can be challenging.
Absolutely, and we're going to look at both definitions during our show today. We're going to take a look at the skills and the tact that the everyday person can use to behave diplomatically. And we're really excited later in our show, in our interview portion, we're going to be joined by a for-real diplomat. Ambassador Kenneth Quinn spent 32 years in the Foreign Service as one of our nation's diplomats, and he leads the World Food Prize Foundation. He'll be joining us later in the show.
We're really excited for this interview today. And we're also going to take a look at a development challenge that is really the responsibility of another U.S. diplomat, and it's a challenge that we're going to give to you. It's actually a technique that you'll be able to use in those brief conversations that you have with people to make them memorable.
And the frequent viewers of our show know that we draw our invisible tools from the book, Your Invisible Toolbox, that Deb and I co-authored. It contains 100 invisible tools designed to help us in the workplace. It's available on Amazon and on Barnes & Noble. Those of you that are following along in the book, we're in chapter 52, The Everyday Diplomat.
And that second definition of diplomat, where it's just someone who is able to be tactful and manage those interactions, leads us to believe there are opportunities for us to be diplomatic in our everyday life. And so Ro and I have thought of some of the situations that come up in which diplomacy would be helpful. We invite you to think of the things that would be applicable to your business situation.
So have you ever felt tension in the workplace because nobody's willing to bring up the elephant in the room for fear of inciting a conflict?
Or have you been the one that had to bring up a sensitive topic and didn't know how to broach the subject?
And what about those times we're in an uncomfortable situation, we are fuming silently on the inside, just hoping somebody will say or do something?
Or you're in a negotiation with a colleague and you're at an impasse and you don't know how to shift the conversation so it's more productive.
And we've all had situations where we've been in a disagreement with someone, it escalates to a conflict, and then later on we really regret our actions and wish we'd handled it differently.
Or we've backed down to someone who is over-controlling in the conversation because we didn't know what else to do.
And have you ever wondered how to facilitate a productive dialogue between two parties who are holding completely opposing views on a topic?
It is important to be able to figure out how to disagree without being disagreeable.
So these are just a few examples of the type of situations in the workplace and actually in our personal lives that can benefit from the skills and tact of diplomacy. These are high-level skills, and they are complex to acquire, but the good news is they can be learned.
They can. So let's take a look at our invisible tool of the week. It comes from chapter 52 in Your Invisible Toolbox, and the chapter is titled The Everyday Diplomat.
And the tool is titled Act with Diplomacy. And in the book, we tell the story of an everyday diplomat. It's a young man who's on a shuttle bus at a very, very early hour in the morning. Those of us that travel know this pattern. With a bunch of inconvenienced travelers, there's a lot of tension, and he just pulls out some of the tools of diplomacy and makes an otherwise tense situation really a little bit more pleasant for everyone.
He does, and a lot of times we think of diplomacy as being scary or complicated or reserved for people who are doing kind of high-stakes negotiations, and yet diplomacy is something that we can demonstrate on a daily basis.
So what are the actions each of us can take just day to day to act diplomatically?
Well, it's not just being nice. It's actually being able to promote your interests, whatever they are, with a consideration and concern for the other party's interests as well.
And it's not just about saying the right thing. Our nonverbals communicate an awful lot about us when we're interacting with others. So our eye contact, our open body language, a moderate neutral tone of voice are all some of the attributes of a diplomat.
And diplomats are able to listen, and they listen to seek to understand and to be able to empathize and also create some common ground between two diverse opinions or two parties.
And it is a commonly held misperception that diplomacy is about political correctness or that it's about weakness. It is neither of those things. It is about standing up for what's important to us while respecting the interests and needs of others. It's about achieving results while also preserving relationships and not sacrificing one for the other.
So there's a real call to a personal diplomacy or attention to diplomacy that would affect positively our neighborhoods, our workplaces, our families.
This is the part of the program that we call Your Development Challenge, and this is where we challenge you to challenge yourself and try something new. And today we're going to look at one of the skills of diplomacy, very much applied in the work environment. How can we network more effectively?
And we attribute this to U.S. statesman Henry Kissinger. And basically what his technique was to make every brief conversation memorable. How do you do that? Well, first of all, he would introduce himself and shake hands, and then ask the person an open-ended question. That way they would begin talking a little more in depth about themselves. And then he would also disclose. A good conversation is going to take someone you inquiring, someone telling you something, you connecting, and then also disclosing. But when he was ready to depart the conversation, rather than doing what many of us do, which is just there's a lull and so we kind of walk away or the other person walks away, he would say these two words, "Excuse me, I've got to," and it really didn't matter what he said. It could be, "I've got to get around to the other people in the room," but just that "excuse me," and the reason was a punctuation point. But that wasn't the end. The finish is actually a closing handshake with an affirmation to the other person. So something about them. "I'm so glad I had a chance to talk with you this evening." That closes that conversation and actually dignifies it. Wonderful technique to be able to use.
It's a wonderful technique and something to practice this week as your development challenge. Well, those of you that follow Tero on social media already know that we post useful links and relevant content several times every day. We're going to feature 2 of those posts today. And our first featured social media post is to a TED Talk, and it's with former U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. She talks pretty bluntly about politics and diplomacy, and this is quite frankly a hilarious talk that's also insightful. And that'll be on all Tero social media platforms today.
And our second post is really an honor to our host today at the World Food Prize. We're in this beautiful building, and we're going to be joined by Ambassador Kenneth Quinn. And we're thrilled to say this post is a 2016 TED Talk, and it's Ambassador Quinn talking about his career as a diplomat and also that leading to feeding the world's population. We're going to have that on all Tero social media on Wednesday.
Well, this is the segment of the program we called This Week's Interview, and we are absolutely delighted to welcome to our table Ambassador Kenneth Quinn.
Hi.
Ambassador,
Hi,
thank
Ro.
you
How are
so
you,
much
Deb?
for
So
joining
nice to
us.
be with you.
Nice to be with
Yeah.
you.
Well, we are thrilled to welcome Ambassador Quinn. He's had an impressive career in diplomatic service, 32 years in the Foreign Service, and has been leading the World Food Prize here. So thank you for joining us. And I have to, before we do the interview, I have to pause and say thank you. Ambassador Quinn was kind enough to read our book before it was published and provide his comments. And we were just so inspired by his comments, they became the preface of the book. Thank you for
Well,
that.
I'm so honored to be included. It's such an incredible book. I want to buy, maybe you can help me, get a case of books.
We can help with that.
I want to give one to every one of my George Washington Carver interns, college students who work here with our staff. It's their first step into the professional world in an internship. So many lessons I'm going to tell them. If you follow everything in this book, you're going to be a success in your career, no matter what you do.
Oh, what a great testimonial. Thank you.
Yes, so much. Well, before we get started, would you share with our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I was born in the Bronx, and when I was 10 years old, my parents moved to the Midwest and took me along with them. So I grew up in Dubuque, Iowa, went to high school, college there, went off to graduate school, and then joined the Foreign Service and became a diplomat.
How did your diplomatic career actually start? What was the...
Well, to become a career diplomat, you have to take a test. And truth be told, I wanted to be an attorney. I wanted to be Perry Mason in the courtroom, winning cases, but I didn't have enough money to take the law school admissions test. But the Foreign Service test was free. So I signed up, I took it, I got the scores, I passed. Perhaps they got my scores mixed up with somebody from Harvard or Princeton, but whatever. I got into the Foreign Service. I showed up in Washington in 1967, all set to go off to London or Paris or Vienna. I'd be sipping aperitifs and going to fancy parties, and instead they ended up sending me to Vietnam in the middle of the Vietnam War. We're all watching Ken Burns' documentary on the war. And I found out, working out in villages in Vietnam, that I was more suited to doing that than hanging out in the salons of Europe. Changed the whole course of my life.
Oh my goodness. What was it like to serve as U.S. Ambassador in Cambodia in the 90s?
Well, being U.S. Ambassador is the greatest honor of my life, representing our country. I was in Phnom Penh. The country had been devastated by the Khmer Rouge, the worst genocidal mass murdering terrorists of the second half of the 20th century. We were sort of helping pick up the pieces, had a kind of rundown embassy, and my house was rocketed with my wife and children in it. You know, I tell people you don't know how much you love your children until you're laying on top of them, praying that the bullets being fired come in if they hit you and not them. We had no Marines at my embassy. It was the most exposed embassy in the world. But we had an important mission there, and we ended up destroying the Khmer Rouge, the Pol Pot terrorists.
You shared with us a story of some negotiations you did or how you approached. We talked a lot about common ground. Can you share that with our viewers?
Yes, well, negotiations and diplomacy, finding common ground. When I was Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, we were trying to get into prisons in North Vietnam after the war to search to see any evidence of living Americans. So I go to Hanoi, I have a negotiation speaking Vietnamese, so I'm negotiating in Vietnamese. I'm saying to them, you have to let us in, please, you know, we need to search there. And the Vice Foreign Minister didn't say yes or no. Said, the press are outside, you want to go out with me, we'll brief the press. So I figured, well, I'd probably get in trouble if I brief the press, so I said, I don't need to go. He goes out, he briefs the press about our negotiation session. He comes back in, he turns to me and he said, I see that you did not come here to embarrass us. You can go to any prison you want, just tell me which one you want to go to, we'll arrange it. And so the lesson was, you have to understand how the person you're negotiating with views you, views how you speak, where you speak, and in their mind, saying something public was only meant to make them lose face, to embarrass them. You weren't being serious by being vocal, and I then used that approach. I'd come back to see him and I'd say, there's some political prisoners being held, it'd be good if you release them. And then I'd wait a month or two, they'd release them, and I'd compliment them. So it was an incredible lesson about understanding how the person you're negotiating with views you and views how and what you say and where you say it.
achieving results while preserving relationships.
Yes.
So
Yes.
critical.
That's definitely something that we could transfer to business. What other element of diplomacy do you think is so important for people in business?
Well, knowing the background of people you're working with, I always try to look up where did they go to school, what was their background, did they play sports, did they have interest in something, did they serve in Vietnam, were they interested in basketball as I was. Just trying to find something there that you can start and build on. So I've negotiated in Hanoi, in Beijing, in Moscow with the Russians, and one of the ways you can find common ground is through confronting hunger, as the World Food Prize and Dr. Borlaug was about. Dr. Borlaug's was respected in Iran. Just imagine, here we have this terrible strained relationship with Iran, and they're giving Dr. Borlaug a gold medal. Dr. Borlaug respected in Pakistan, in India, all because he found that common ground, that element of how do we deal with each other. The most dangerous moment of human history, 1959, nuclear weapons poised to be fired at each other by the US and the Soviet Union. Big moment, Khrushchev, the Soviet premier, comes to Iowa, goes to the Garst farm in Coon Rapids, and develops a relationship with Roswell Garst and John Crystal, leads to 2 decades of exchanges on agriculture, nothing to do with nuclear disarmament, everything to do with building some trust in the personal relationship, showing that it is possible to cooperate in some way. That's why I proposed with North Korea. President Trump and President Xi should ask the World Food Prize to send some of our World Food Prize laureates to Pyongyang, and how can we lead some effort, how can they come up with some ideas about how to uplift North Korea? It's worth a shot.
It's worth a shot. Well, and you wrote an article about that. We'll have to see if we can post a link to that.
Yeah.
What can you tell our viewers about the World Food Prize, and how can they find out more?
World Food Prize was started in 1986 by Dr. Norman Borlaug, our state's greatest hero, father of the Green Revolution, Nobel Peace Prize laureate.
Saved 1 billion lives.
Yeah, that's right. Saved, yeah, man, saved the statues in the U.S. Capitol in Washington, and he wanted there to be a prize that would recognize and inspire breakthrough achievements needed to feed 9+ billion people. Greatest challenge our species, the human race, has ever had is, can we sustainably and nutritiously feed all those people by 2046, when Iowa celebrates its 200th anniversary, the 9 billionth person will be walking on our planet. That's what the World Food Prize is about. But people can participate in a number of ways. The Iowa Hunger Summit is on Monday, October 16th. I know everyone knows that's Dr. Norman Borlaug World Food Prize Day in Iowa. Just go to www.worldfoodprize.org/Hunger Summit or HS registration, and you can register and come for free. There's free lectures all around the state. You can watch the World Food Prize ceremony on Iowa Public Television Thursday night, October 19th. It's free too. And so we are going to have 1,000 people from 40 or 50 countries here in Des Moines. It's going to be the center of the world about food and agriculture.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Oh,
this
we were
fun.
so delighted. And we, when we were preparing for the show, we realized that we did not have the time to get into all of the depth we wanted to. So we're going to do a little experiment. Ambassador Quinn has agreed to stay with us for a few minutes after we close out this live show. And we're going to record some more questions and hear some more of his experiences. So thank you for agreeing to do that. Thank you all for joining us today. If you missed any portion of the program, or if you want to share it with others, you'll find the entire program loaded up to Tero's YouTube channel. Join us again next Monday morning at 9:03 Central Time, where we'll explore another tool in your Invisible Toolbox.
And now it's your turn. We welcome your ideas and suggestions for future shows. Email your ideas to ideas@yourinvisibletooolbox.com, and we will incorporate those in our future shows. Please join us on your favorite social media platform. We're also on Instagram, and would like to thank Kyle Plummer, our cameraman and director, and Rachel Trainum, who is here today also helping with this live shoot at the World Food Prize.
And before we sign off, I'd like to reiterate what Ambassador Quinn says. Please do tune in to Iowa Public Television on Thursday, October 19th, so that you can watch the presentation of the World Food Prize as it happens. Thanks again, Ambassador Quinn,
Thanks for having me. Yeah, this was fun.
Thanks to all of you for joining us, and that's a wrap.